Okay, so hello everyone that is watching today. Welcome to the first in a new series of webinars, which P4P is, or Partnership for Procurement, to give us our Sunday name, is running, called In Conversation With. So my name is Neil Young, and I help coordinate the P4P project. My background is kind of primarily within business development, tendering, partnership development, supply chain development within the third sector, and mainly within social enterprise. And as a coordinator of the P4P project, I'm responsible for providing one-to-one support to social enterprises, developing and running events such as these, as well as developing new resources and guidance. And today we're joined by Jay Martin from Cooperative Development Scotland, who's now going to introduce herself.
Hi Neil, thank you. Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. So I'm Jay Martin, as Neil said, from Cooperative Development Scotland. We are a team who sit within Scottish Enterprise, and our remit is to work with businesses who are interested in either employee ownership or any sort of cooperative business model. So the three main models that we tend to work with are employee ownership, consortium cooperatives, which is what we're going to focus on today, and we do some work with community cooperatives as well. And we work across the whole of Scotland, so even though our team actually sits within Scottish Enterprise, and we do cover the Highlands and Islands areas as well. In terms of my background, I've worked in Scottish Enterprise for about 12 years now. I've no idea how that happened, but anyway, 12 years. Before that, in the midst of time, I was actually a lawyer in private practice, but I moved into Scottish Enterprise, as I say, 12 years ago, into the Scottish Investment Bank team, and worked there for a few years on the transaction side, and then moved into the Cooperative Development Scotland team. So I've been there for about the past 7 years, working across all of the three models that we deal with in the team. So yeah, so I've got a lot of kind of background and in funding and various things like that. So yes, that's me in a nutshell.
Oh, Jay, I didn't actually realise you came from a law background.
Yeah, don't hold it against me. Do you?
Oh, yeah.
I feel like you maybe do as well, Neil, but I don't know if I've remembered that correctly.
Yeah, no, you have. I do as well. So it's funny that we're kind of both working in this kind of sector with that
Yes,
kind of as well.
I know.
Right. So in the In Conversation With webinar series, we are going to be joined by a range of individuals and organizations from the social enterprise and wider third sector who are either kind of successfully collaborating with others or are supporting those who are successfully collaborating. This could be for a variety of different purposes, but may include to achieve greater social impact, generate more income, develop new services, or perhaps respond to an emerging need, such as those which have emerged as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And as I mentioned, in today's webinar, we're joined by Jay Martin from Cooperative Development Scotland. So Jay is going to provide an overview of the consortium cooperative model, describe the benefits of forming a cooperative and the practical steps to do so. She's going to give you some examples of existing cooperatives, and she's also going to speak about the funded support that's available from CDS. So before Jay's presentation, I'm going to provide you with an introduction to P4P. So that's in case you're joining today's webinar and you don't know too much about us already. And if you please note that there's going to be a Q&A session following Jay's presentation, and that you can use the Q&A function at any time. So we actively encourage you to do this in order to make the webinar as interactive as possible. So, and also please note that a recording, we're currently recording this session, and a recording will be made available later on. We're going to be uploading it to the P4P YouTube page. And you will see that there is a live poll that we're running throughout today's session. So if you want to take part in that poll, please do, and that will be running throughout the whole session, and we'll check out the results before finishing up. So for those of you that don't know, the aim of P4P is to increase the long-term sustainability of the enterprising third sector, and this includes social enterprise. One of the main ways that we do this is to support Scottish-based social enterprises to develop new partnerships or to strengthen existing ones, with a view to then bidding jointly for procurement opportunities. We do also support collaboration more generally, and this became particularly relevant during the current pandemic. Core funding is provided by the Scottish Government through its 10-year social enterprise strategy, as well as the action plans that sit underneath that. And it's worth saying that we are managed by Social Enterprise Network Scotland, or SENSCOT, and governed by a partnership that includes Cooperative Development Scotland, as well as the Scottish Community Alliance and SENSCOT. This slide provides some information about our activities and services with the third sector. So you'll see there, we provide various one-to-one support services for social enterprises, which focus on providing organizations with the knowledge and skills required to tender for contracts and with developing new partnerships. You'll see I provided you with some examples. So that could include drafting a collaboration project plan, drafting a partnership agreement, advice on different partnership models, facilitating collaboration development sessions, as well as support to plan and draft joint tenders for contracts. And those services are funded through our core funding from the Scottish Government. We also run regular events and training sessions. So sometimes these are funded, such as today. We also provide a range of bespoke charged training sessions, and that includes our collaboration skills training, which is aimed at ensuring the longer term sustainability of organizations through exploring opportunities for future partnership working. We also deliver a cascade training workshop, which is aimed at supporting membership or business support organizations, allowing them to advise their members or clients on procurement and collaboration. So that's a bit like a train-the-trainer type training. And we've also recently developed a procurement skills accelerator training program, which is an intensive training program for third sector organizations in procurement and tendering, and that's delivered over a short period of time, typically one session a week for 4 weeks. The P4P website is our primary tool for raising awareness of procurement and collaboration, and it's a great source of information on current and upcoming tender and partnership opportunities. And it also includes an extensive resource database, which includes our flagship resources such as the Collaboration Toolkit, which is a step-by-step guide on how to develop a partnership over a longer period of time and can be used to track your progress. Other flagship resources include our 10-stage guide to procurement, and also a guide that we developed near the start of the pandemic called Collaboration During a Crisis. We also offer a range of specialist consultancy services in addition to our funded support. So to give you an example, this includes our procurement health check service, which is a bespoke assessment and evaluation of your tender readiness. And through that, you are provided with a report setting out your areas for improvement. In addition to our work with social enterprises, we also work closely with our partners in the public and private sector. So the aim of our work with the public sector is to engage in order to influence and shape procurement policy and legislation. And our work with the private sector includes offering a social enterprise matching service to support private sector organizations with identifying and then effectively onboarding social enterprise suppliers into their supply chain. And before we hear from Jay, it's worth going over what the main types of consortium models are. There are 4 main types, and there can be kind of variations and combinations of these types, of which a cooperative fits into kind of one of these. One type of consortium model that you can use for joint tendering is a managing agent model, and that's where an existing organization bids for a contract and then subcontracts 100% of the contract delivery. Instead, they focus on managing the contract and acting as the main contact for the buyer. Managing provider is very similar to managing agent, but this is where the lead organization also delivers some of the contract, as well as manage the contract and act as the buyer's main contact. There's also what is called what we dub a super provider consortium, and that's where a number of organizations come together to form a new legal body which they jointly own. So a consortium cooperative is a type of super provider consortium, and that's what we'll be speaking in detail about today. And then finally, an informal network, and that's where a group of organizations come together to bid for a contract, but there is no lead organization and there's no new legal entity formed. More detail about these different consortium models are provided in our collaboration toolkit document, which you can download for free on the toolkit section of our website. So I'm now going to hand over to Jay, who is going to speak about the consortium cooperative model in more detail. And also, just as another reminder, you can use the Q&A function at any time to ask questions, and then we've got our Q&A section at the end of the session once Jay has spoken. So I'm just going to hand over to Jay, and I'm going to share her presentation. Okay, Jay, if you want to go off mute.
Thanks, Neil.
And then I'll go on mute.
We've actually had one question already, but I think we might just hold it just now until we get into this presentation a little bit, and hopefully the answer will actually become clear, but I'll sort of sweep it up at the end anyway.
No worries. So, yeah, just let me know if you want to change slide.
Okay. So thanks everyone, and thanks Neil for the scene setting there. So yeah, we're just going to talk fairly quickly. So it is going to be a bit of a skiff through the consortium cooperative model, but obviously, if anyone's very particularly interested in hearing more about the model, then I can speak to them offline. So what is the consortium cooperative model? So in a nutshell, it's a collective or a collection of businesses who generally have some sort of common goal or aim, and may have actually been working together informally already, but there's usually some sort of trigger that makes the group think that they should perhaps go down the formal route. And this can differ, but typically what we see is the main triggers are if there's a tendering opportunity, and also perhaps funding opportunities, so a large funded project, and often those things have a requirement for a formal legal entity to be set up, and that's so a lot of the inquiries that we get from groups of businesses are linked to that sort of trigger. So members of the consortium cooperative, because the essential thing to note about any sort of cooperative model is that it's really built around the members, and it's for the benefit of those members. So in a consortium cooperative model, the members are usually independent businesses or social enterprises, and typically at CDS we would see those businesses as being quite small and even micro businesses. And that's not to say that you can't have a consortium cooperative with large businesses involved, and we do see some of those, but I would say just more typically it is on the smaller end of the scale. And that's just obviously reflective of, you know, the business base in Scotland, where there's heavy prevalence of SMEs. So number of members of the consortium cooperative, we work with groups from 2 members upwards. My personal preference is that we would see 3 members at least and upwards, because I just think that 3 is a better number to start with. But we have worked with quite a lot of groups who just have 2, and they maybe have an aim to, you know, increase the membership as they go along. So that's absolutely fine. The consortium is governed on a shared and equal basis by members. That's a really key part of the cooperative approach, the sort of democratic and transparent approach, and that's really what gives what one of the main things that sets it aside from perhaps other collaborative approaches. Cooperative principles are embedded into the constitution of the consortium cooperative, and I would say, just as a general comment, that there is a bit of a spectrum for this. So we deal with a whole range of clients, and some of them I would say are very much quite heavily on the cooperative scale. So they will really want there are 7 cooperative principles that are used globally, and you know, those principles could be embedded into the constitution, or you could just have something that's a bit more light touch, and we see that as well. So, and everything in between. The consortium is legally separate from its members, and I think that maybe picks up on the question that we've had, which I'll come back to. So this does involve the member businesses setting up a new legal structure, a new company, which is separate to them. So member businesses would retain their control over their own business and their own brand. So I always refer to it as people having different hats on. So a member business would still have its own business hat on and would go away and do that, you know, their own stuff as they always had done. But they would also have this other hat that we'd put on, which would be for the consortium. And the two, there are lines between the two, and that's important to keep things clean. It's a very flexible structure. The extent of flexibility really depends on which legal structure that the members choose to put in place, because there's many options to consider for that. So there's no one particular legal structure that's used for cooperatives in the UK. What happens is people tend to pick and choose from the options that are out there. So you can have anything from a company limited by shares, that's quite unusual, but company limited by shares, company limited by guarantee is definitely the most common type that we see for a consortium cooperative. It's very flexible and it's well known, but we also have clients who use community interest company structure, who even use the, if there's a charitable element, then they can use the Scottish Charitable Incorporated Organisation, the SCIO. So we've seen that as well. Again, it's quite unusual. And there's also the societies. So the cooperative society could be used for this. Again, it's quite unusual. So I would say the vast bulk of our clients would tend to use a company limited by guarantee. But as I say, that's you know, that doesn't have to be the option that you go for. But we can help you consider all of those things. If you could go on to the next slide, Neil, that would be great. I'm just going to talk now a bit about, sorry, I'm just using two screens here. I'm going to talk a bit about the benefits of forming a cooperative, a consortium cooperative. So some of these benefits on the slide are probably just more general, and you would see these benefits potentially with other collaborative models, the ones that Neil had talked about in his introduction. So things like sharing risks and resources, scaling up quickly. Again, just coming back to this point about Scotland's business space being heavily dependent on smaller and micro businesses, scaling up is a real issue. And so coming together and collaborating with other businesses is a really good way to do that. A consortium cooperative also lets you formalise that collaboration in a democratic way. So some of the other ways, especially when we're talking about tendering, some of the other approaches to tendering are perhaps arguably not so good for the smaller or the micro businesses or social enterprises that might be involved in that. So if we're talking about something like perhaps a joint venture or a lead contractor subcontractor model, there may be a bit of a power imbalance there if there's a larger company and a smaller company involved. So the democratic approach definitely of one member, one vote can definitely help with that. When we're talking about tendering or funding, the legal basis of the collaboration is clear for the buyers or for the funders, and sometimes they make that an actual requirement, and sometimes it's just a really good thing to have, a nice to have. And also the same goes for your clients and customers. So they see not a sort of random collection of lots of different companies, but they see a joint brand and they see one point of contact. So that can be a real advantage. I think focusing in on the specific benefits for the cooperative approach, I think that a lot has changed or developed perhaps in the last few months, and I thought, I mean, I was off this view beforehand, but I think it's really crystallised over the last few months that values-based businesses are viewed very positively. That's in the general public and, you know, with the clients, customers, buyers, you know, I think across the spectrum really. And so when you're looking at something that's of a shared ownership basis or plural ownership, these are phrases that are now being, you know, thrown about quite a lot. I think it can only be a good thing, and I feel like maybe this is potentially a bit of a breakthrough moment for models like cooperatives and obviously social enterprises. I think there's going to be a lot more attention paid to the values and ethos of businesses going forward. I got a wee stat here because you need to have a wee stat or two, and there was a YouGov survey for the Build Back Better campaign, which showed that only 6% of the public want to return to the same type of economy as pre-pandemic. So that's really quite staggering and very interesting. So I think it's only good for business models like cooperatives. Resilience, I've mentioned there's a bit of, well, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that in the last few months, plural ownership businesses have had a really good level of resilience against the pandemic and against what's happened to the economy and businesses. And there's a lot of, I think there's going to be a lot of research done off the back of what's happened, and it's still just really in the early stages, but there does seem to be a lot of stories of just ability to sort of bounce back, and that reliance on the community spirit, and all of that is I think a really positive thing for a business model like a cooperative. And just this also again linked to the pandemic, I think increased focus on community and place and well-being and environment. And we're seeing across Scotland that there's a number of the local authorities who are really interested in the concept of community wealth building, which will definitely include focus on plural ownership models like cooperatives. And also we suspect that there'll be a lot more focus with tendering on using local businesses. So I think that the opportunities for collaborative tendering are hopefully just going to increase in the next wee while. So all of those are good reasons to form a cooperative. I'm just going to look at some of the questions. So the question that we had was, if a cooperative successfully tenders, how is the contract managed? Is it by the cooperative, the entity, or by cooperative members? So the legal entity would be the name that the buyer would be dealing with. But it's a bit of a difficult question actually, because I think the answer is sort of both. So the cooperative members would collectively manage the contract, but it would be from a legal perspective, it would be the consortium cooperative that would be the supplier. So I don't know if that's answered the question or not, but we can maybe come back to that at the end, and Neil can maybe help me out with that as well. If you could go on to the next slide, Neil, that would be great. So I'm just going to talk about the practical steps to forming a consortium cooperative. So obviously, if anyone was interested in this, then CDS can help with this. So I don't want anyone to sort of worry about this, because help is at hand. But just to give you a bit of an idea, a lot would depend on the context for setting up the consortium. We see probably two distinct scenarios, especially when we're talking about tendering or funding. Quite often it's a reactive inquiry we get because there's a tender opportunity or a funding opportunity that's come up, and a group wants to mobilise and to be able to be in a position to bid for that contract or to apply for that funding. Or proactive, sometimes we see groups who have sort of, I guess, been horizon scanning, or they see that there's an issue in their particular industry or sector, and they think, right, if we can get ourselves mobilised and get a group together, then we'll be ready for when the opportunity does come up. So obviously with the reactive one, we usually have a bit less time. And with the proactive one, we usually have a bit more time. So both are entirely possible, because things can be done quite quickly. It's obviously quite nice to have a bit more time to think about things, but that's not always possible. So that's fine. Obviously, the key thing is to identify who do you want to be in your group. Who do you need? As I said, the outset, quite often businesses have already been working together informally, so they might already have a good idea of who they want to have in the collaboration, but equally there might be some gaps there. Quite often the collaborations that we work with are around complementary skill sets, so members will have aligned but quite closely aligned skill sets, but they will be able to come together in that group to fully fulfill a tender, for example. But sometimes, and I would say that's the more common scenario, but sometimes it's about capacity, and it might be about geographical coverage, especially in Scotland, where obviously we've got lots of rural areas, or just that, you know, there's a high volume required, and the, you know, members can't deal with that individually on their own. So you need to obviously have a think about that. Agree at least one mutual objective. That seems like a bit of a no-brainer, I know, but it's actually amazing how many groups can get quite far down the line without really having bashed that out. And I think it certainly made us at CDS kind of think about paying much more attention to that at the outset with clients, and just making sure that you might think that everyone in the group has got the same shared aim, but actually in reality, do they? So it's quite good to have those conversations up front, and it flushes out quite a lot of issues. Is a core group required? I put that in because some of the groups that we work with are actually quite large membership bases, and that's maybe not so relevant for this webinar, because it's usually in the tourism sector. For example, you can get quite large tourism consortia coming together. So where you've got a bigger group, you might want to nominate a core group to deal with some of the practicalities, like dealing with the legal structure, etc. So, but if you've got quite a small group, you know, of 3 or 4 of businesses or social enterprises, then, you know, that's not necessarily required. I would also just make sure that there's usually one person in a group who's the sort of driving force. And that's great, and that's what's needed, but you just have to be really careful and have to be mindful of everyone in the rest of the collaboration, that you don't let that person burn out, because that does happen. So just, again, it's just something to be mindful of. So then you'd be thinking about selecting your legal structure, and CDS could work with you to kind of go through all the different options and see what's most appropriate for your group. Then there's the governing documents, which is the boring bit, but also is important. I need to say that because of the whole law background thing. So it is actually important, because it does, working through the governing documents, such as, you know, your constitution or your articles, it depends what legal structure you use, but working through those as a group actually flushes out quite often quite a lot of issues, important issues that are to do with, you know, the day-to-day running of your consortium. And the documents are publicly available, so you do obviously want to take care as to what goes in there. So that is important, although yes, admittedly quite boring. And then looking at clear roles and responsibilities and systems and processes, those are just other examples of good governance, and again might seem a bit boring, but is really, really important. It's really important for your customers, your clients, buyers, funders, and also if you look in the future to maybe encourage new members to join, you know, they'll have a lot of comfort from the fact if you've got good systems and processes in place and clear lines, that you know, that everyone knows what they're doing. So it's definitely worth, again, taking a bit of time over that. I know it's not always possible, especially if you're, you know, if this is a reactive one and we're trying to get everything together in time to respond to a tender opportunity, but just to be mindful. But again, yeah, help is at hand, so don't worry. Neil, can you go on to the next slide, please? I think I'm taking up too much time, so I'll try and I'll not spend too much time on these, but I've got a couple of case studies for you. This first one is specifically to do with tendering, but it's not social enterprises, but I just thought it was a good example. So Indigo House, as a collaboration, it was originally just two businesses that came to us, and they had actually been working together informally, and they had a I think, and they had actually they had tendered together informally, but they'd found themselves up against some larger businesses who had a sort of multidisciplinary sorry, I've just lost the thread there, who were able to offer a multidisciplinary approach. So they were getting a bit frustrated with this, and they thought, right, if we could put together a formal collaboration, I think, you know, that might really be beneficial. So that's what they did. They provide consultancy support and thought leadership and research services and interim management for clients like housing associations and local authorities. So they came together, put together a consortium cooperative, and yeah, they were then successful in tendering. And since they put their consortium in place, they have been joined by a number of other businesses and consultancies. So yeah, they've really grown in the last few years. So that's a great example of success in tendering under the consortium model. If you could flip to the next slide, Neil, it's another case study, but it's completely different. This one is a much bigger membership base, and it includes social enterprises. And this isn't about tendering, but one of the main triggers that they decided to put a consortium in place was because of funding opportunities. So Glasgow Canal Cooperative, there's 25 members currently in there, including social enterprises, like I said, but also some really big organisations like Scottish Opera and National Theatre of Scotland, as well as there's a water sports company, there's a skate park, there's the Glasgow Tool Library, Glasgow Sculpture Studios. There's such a brilliant mix of businesses together, and they all work in and around a section of the Forth and Clyde Canal. So there had been historically quite a lot of good work and events that had been done on that part of the canal. So that, for example, they'd held a canal festival, and also there'd been a lot of good regeneration work that had been done by Scottish Canals in the area as well. But they felt that they wanted to really bring the businesses together more, and also just to help them apply for funding so that they could do more events and, you know, more projects. So a couple of years ago, the Glasgow Canals Co-op was set up, and they are still going strong. They've managed to apply for some big funded projects, and obviously things are slightly on hold because of COVID, but they are going to be doing lots more events, etc., on that section of the canal. So that's a really nice example of the consortium model, I think. And also just a real mix of businesses, from quite large businesses with a national remit to very small social enterprises. That's a good one. Last slide, please, Neil. So just last slide, you'll be glad to know just a bit about the support that we can offer. So we have some funded support available. So it's 100% fully funded by us. It's up to 2.5 days, and that is around looking at the options for your collaboration and whether a consortium cooperative might be suitable. And if so, then advising on the structure and the legal structure and the governance, and helping your group put that in place. And also just obviously the advantage of being connected into our network. So CDS itself, Scottish Enterprise more widely. And yeah, we know we've got some good advocates out there and other consortia who you can speak to. So yeah, there's more information there at the website link. and very, very happy to, you know, speak to anyone offline if they are interested. Thank you, Neil.
No worries. Okay. I'll kind of stop sharing the screen now. And so now we're on to the kind of the Q&A section. But thank you, Jay, for that presentation. It was really interesting. I thought a lot of what you were talking about in terms of practical steps definitely chimes with a lot of what we recommend when we kind of work with collaborations more generally, especially around when you're talking about that kind of core group. We definitely recommend that you kind of form that kind of core group where people are able to commit to the time to looking at partnership. And also that you know, partnerships are very much reliant on that one like individual. We definitely find that, to be honest, the most successful partnerships usually have that kind of like one really passionate, committed individual who's kind of the driving force behind it.
Absolutely.
So I'm gonna just to remind everyone attending that you can use the Q&A function. So that's open, and we've had a few questions in already, and I'm gonna kick it off. So you talked about the kind of cooperative principles and how that can be a spectrum. But I suppose our question would be kind of what are those cooperative principles and why are they important?
Oh,
it's not a 10. It's okay.
I'm going to fail miserably to quote all 7 off the top of my head, but it's things like being open and transparent, working with other cooperatives is quite an important one. Oh, someone's actually, yeah, someone knows the answer. Who's the one that... That's good. Yeah, so as I say, those are the sort of standard globally for cooperatives. But we, as I say, we have a range of clients who, some of whom do want to embed those principles, and some who are more relaxed about it, are still keen on the cooperative approach, but don't want to formally embed those principles within their constitution, but would still have something in there that talked about a cooperative approach and you know, democratic and transparent and those sorts of good things, but not to the extent of the community, you know, looking out for the community and the environmental stuff as well. Mm-hmm. So as I say, we do have a spectrum.
So are there some that are more important than others, perhaps? Or is that a controversial question?
Well, we wouldn't, yeah. I mean, as I say, a lot of our clients aren't, yeah, we don't tend to kind of focus down on those, just because we are interested in, at its core, I suppose, like business collaboration. And so we are open to being a bit more relaxed about it, and we would focus in on the democratic part, because we recognise that especially consortia which have a mix of members, including larger and smaller businesses, we would want to make sure that the smaller businesses have a voice. So that would be the part that we would tend to focus down on, rather than the other principles.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that a consortium cooperative particularly suits social enterprise?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I would think so. I mean, I don't know. I think that there's certain types of businesses in certain sectors that it really fits well with, because some of these sectors and types of businesses and subsectors already work very collaboratively, and so it's not too much of a giant leap to then come into something like a consortium cooperative model. Mm-hmm. So for example, we would see like trends in certain sectors like tourism, like creative industries, because that's more what they're used to doing, whereas we don't tend to get a lot of inquiries from for example, construction or oil and gas and sectors like that, because they just have a different way of doing things. So I think that social enterprises are quite high on that sort of collaborative working spectrum anyway, and so I think it is a nice fit. And also just the fact that a lot of social enterprises would be on the kind of smaller end of the scale, and so again, that's just such a great reason to try and work together, and especially if there's a squeeze on funding, anything like that could be a good trigger to to try and come together and save costs, share costs as well. It's not just about things like tendering and funding, it's about sharing back office resource, or admin resource, or all of these things can be really beneficial for smaller businesses. So yes, that was a long way of saying yes.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for that. I thought we could then open the Q&A to the attendees. So I'll just try and work my way through these.
Mm-hmm.
So we had one question which asked how autonomous, I was about to say how anonymous are cooperatives, how autonomous are cooperatives?
I'm not sure how to interpret that. Well, I mean, if they're set up as, if they're a formal legal entity in themselves, then they're obviously acting independently as that cooperative. So yes, very autonomous. But I wonder if the question's maybe more to do with the sort of separation between the members and the co-op itself. In which case it would be, well, the members are everything for the cooperative. So in which so they're and it's really it's there for the benefit of the members, and it's driven by the members, and it's member led. So in that case it's not autonomous. So I'm just not quite sure what the question is asking, but
be interpreted two ways there, because it's autonomous in the sense that it relies on the decision making of the members, but not autonomous in the sense that it's member led at the same time.
Exactly. Yes. Thanks.
Well, I hope that answers that question. And we've also had a question which was, and you kind of started to answer this one before, if a cooperative legal entity successfully tenders, how is that contract managed? So is it managed by the actual legal entity? So for example, would that legal entity be staffed? Or is it managed by one or multiple of the cooperative members?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it could be either approaches. It just depends. I would say that the majority of the consortia that we deal with, the legal entity itself is set up to be quite sort of fleet of foot and quite a virtual entity in a way. So it probably wouldn't be staffed. So the management, the actual sort of day-to-day management of the contract would then fall to one or more of the members. But it just depends, because sometimes there may be a coordinator who's put in place for the cooperative. It really depends what stage the cooperative is at in its journey. And so that coordinator could manage the contract. But yeah, I would say that more commonly, and especially in the reactive cases where there's just not, there's not been time to kind of think about things like that, that the contract would be managed by one or more of the underlying members. And they would need to, so that would need to be discussed and agreed, obviously, and flushed out among the members, and probably narrated in a members agreement or something similar. So that everyone was clear on what was happening.
Okay, so would the management be like subcontracted to one of the members, or?
Yeah, you could look at it like that, and they could be reimbursed for that. If that was how they wanted to do it. It is quite flexible, so it's really however the membership wants to make it work. But yeah, that could be one way of doing it.
Okay, thanks for that. So we have a couple other questions. So Claire from the P4P team is asking if you are tendering for a contract as a cooperative, so how do you overcome the challenge of being potentially ineligible due to being a new legal entity? So
Yeah,
if you are trying to, if you're tendering for a public contract, you're subject to eligibility
yeah,
checks for like financially sound you are.
yeah,
So as a new legal entity, you wouldn't really have that kind of financial history.
yeah, yeah.
And we come across this a lot at P4P. This is quite a common one. So
Yeah, I know. It's a challenge. So some of the groups that we've worked with, um, they have managed to submit their own financials, and so as members they have been able to do that, and that's been taken into account, not the legal entity itself, because it obviously doesn't have its own financial history. But obviously in a lot of especially in the public sector, it's much more rigid, so that is definitely a barrier, I would say. So I would say it's easier to tender for the private sector stuff without the financial background. And it's something that we've spoken to Scottish Government about in the past, and there's a recognition that it is a barrier, but unfortunately it has always been fairly far down the list in terms of trying to sort it out. So it's a bit of an ongoing issue, I would say. So yeah, we have had sometimes we would recommend that groups should try and have a conversation with the buyer, and try and do it that way, because sometimes there will be ways around it, and it's very difficult, obviously, just to deal with a sort of computer system, I suppose. So a lot of the buyers, certainly Scottish Enterprise as a public sector buyer, would be quite happy to have conversations with people in advance of tender submissions. So that sort of approach might work.
Okay, no, great. I mean, I think that's also, we would recommend doing the same at P4P, to be honest. And there is a function, there's an ability within the European Single Procurement Document eligibility check in tendering where you can rely on one of your subcontractors to pass financial tests.
Yeah.
So that's one potential way around it. And it means that, say, if the cooperative had to hand back a contract, which obviously, fingers crossed, never happened, but it means that the contract that the organisation that signed up to essentially an organisation, one of the members then signs up to taking on the contract.
Yeah.
We then have to discuss, obviously, between your members.
Yeah.
In that kind of scenario.
I know. It's a bit chicken and egg, because they need to be able to build up, their financial history, but you can't do that unless you can get some contracts. So yeah, so you're right. It probably does sometimes rely on one member taking a bit of a risk, and again, that needs to be discussed within the group.
I suppose another way around that would be to go for either private contracts, as you say.
Yeah.
Look at maybe low value public contracts.
Yeah, exactly, because exactly. So look at the risk profile of the value of the contract, and the buyer will have obviously a different approach depending on what that is. Definitely.
I've got time for one more question quickly, so before we finish up the session. So Jay, what would you say are the top 3 member benefits in being part of a cooperative?
Okay, top 3 member benefits. I would say some of it's a bit softer. So I would say being part of something where you have like-minded businesses or organizations, and having that the comfort of that backup, because it can be quite isolating for smaller businesses, in particular smaller social enterprises, I guess, especially at the moment as well. And so that would be one. I mean, that does come up from clients. They do recognise that. I would say just the sharing of the knowledge and resources and networks. Again, that's a bit softer. So a group like Glasgow Canals, with the 20, and that's a bigger membership, so that's 25 members, but they're from such a diverse background that, the amount of resource that they've got there collectively to tap into. And then thirdly, I would just then say, well, being part of a cooperative, because, that, as I was talking about in the presentation, being part of a values-based business, it is about profitability and about success, but it's about more than that, because it's about, having some sort of ethos and belief in having something to give back. And I think that's really important. And a lot of, it's a great selling point in a lot of our clients, and on the cooperative side and also on employee ownership side, they'll very proudly put on their websites and their marketing materials that they are a cooperative or they are an employee-owned business. And it's a real thing that everyone believes in and buys into. And also, so do clients and customers and suppliers. They get really positive feedback. So that would be my third one.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I think that was really, it was nice to kind of finish up that session on a positive note. So thank you for the question. I'm glad there wasn't like a negative question there at the end. In terms of the poll, so we've got 75% of attendees would be interested in forming a cooperative.
Well, that's good.
Or that's always good as well. Or those that are forming one. So thank you to Jay again for taking part in today's session. I thought that was really useful. And thank you to the attendees as well. So remember to check out the P4P website for access to our resources and understand what services we can offer. And you can get in contact with us numerous ways, including the Contact Us form. There's also, in terms of CDS, they've got a section on the Scottish Enterprise website, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, Jay, but it's called the Business Collaboration Pages. Is that it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Would they be able to get in contact with you directly, or?
Yeah, sure. Are you gonna, if you can share my contact details, if you're going to circulate anything after this, Neil, maybe?
Yeah, so I'm happy to circulate slides and I can share contact details.
Yeah, that's fine. Absolutely, get in touch directly. That's no problem. And
yeah, as I said before, a recording of today's session is going to be made available on the P4P YouTube page. Just if anyone else is interested in attending the next webinar, which is around the same time next month, and it's going to be with the Glasgow Arts Partnership, which is actually one of my clients currently, which is a group of arts and arts organisations and creative freelance creatives in Glasgow, which are coming together to develop new projects together, as well as look at joint tenders. So it's a really interesting one. So that's going to be next month. So thank you to everyone again, and I'll see you next month.
Thanks, Neil. Thanks, everyone.